Hello and welcome to Night Treks. I'm Tom, your ghost host, and we have one of the ETs today, Lewis Powell IV, going to be sharing our story tonight. So the night is dark, so it's time for a tale. Tonight's tale is a little different than the previous two. Um, this one, I'm going to be just upfront with you and say it is a fictional story. Now, the difference is I'm going to ask you at the completion of this story, could this really happen? So, tonight's tale is Old Jake, as interpreted by Lewis Powell IV.
Bonnie had just poured my second cup of coffee. Seems like every little diner in every little town has a Bonnie working as a waitress, and every diner has its regulars. Arriving every morning at the same time, ordering their usual. I recognized several right away. While making these observations, I saw an old man walk into the diner. One of the regulars, I thought. He sat down at what seemed to be his seat at the counter, two down from the front door. He said good morning to Bonnie, Ray, the short order cook, and the other customers. And they all said good morning to old Jake. He ordered his usual one egg over medium, side of ham, and coffee. He then asked, "Y'all seen the paper this morning?" Bonnie said, "Yeah, Shug. What now?" It turns out Jake was not only a regular, but in that regularity, he loved to regale the patrons with past exploits. The other regular patrons had grown to expect and even enjoy his stories. "The obits," said Jake. "I check him every day looking for my name. If it ain't there, I get on up and come on in here." Everyone in the diner joined him in a chuckle. "Well, you'll never guess whose name was in there today," he continued. "Who, Jake?" asked Ray. He looked up from the grill but quickly turned his attention back to the eggs. "My old army buddy, Jim Bradley. We were in the 4th Infantry, Ivy Division in Nam back in '67. We got stuck in that hellacious battle of Dak To and damn near died." I pulled my attention long enough to check my watch. It was almost 8. I didn't have to be back in my office until noon, and it was only about another hour's drive. I've come to enjoy these little road trips for work and tend to take the scenic route whenever possible. When I looked back up, old Jake was into his story. Ray had served up his breakfast and he was talking in between bites. He was saying that he and Jim had looked at Docto Hill and were chilled to the bone. An entire division of the enemy was up there and we had no idea how we were going to take it. Thank God me and old Jim was just grunts because we didn't think we had enough brains between us to go with eggs for breakfast. Old Jake went on to tell the horror story of brave men that fought and died that day, heroism that he and Jim got to be a part of. As he continued to tell his story, a strange mist began to fill the diner and fog the front window. A dry wind began blowing, ruffling the napkins in their holders. I smelled burning, but it wasn't coming from the kitchen. It was the smell of burning flesh, gunpowder, and mortar. Jake's words were coming to life in that little diner right there on the side of Route 24. I've heard it said before that good storytellers that can lay out a good plot that I'll start again. I've heard it said that there are good storytellers that can lay out a good plot and you would enjoy the tale. And then there are great storytellers that can make you feel the emotions of the story. But then there are magical storytellers like old Jake that have the uncanny, even mystical ability to actually bring the story to life and give you the sense of being there. It's also claimed that this was the druid Merlin's magical power and that he may have passed it on to many an ancient bard. I began to wonder if old Jake may have just been such a descendant. I looked around to see if any of the others in there were sensing the same thing as me, but the diner was gone. What I saw was Docto Hill. My breathing became labored because of all of the smoke and thick humidity. I could hear sporadic gunfire and the occasional explosion. I could also hear the cries of the wounded and dying. I walked forward to get a clearer look at that hill. There were still plenty of trees and undergrowth to hide my presence, but I still felt apprehensive. Ahead, I could see the front lines where the fighting was at its worst. Behind me, I could hear the artillery guns hurling their deadly ammo towards the hill. Then I heard the throaty roar of U.S. tanks on my left as they were beginning their advance on the enemy. To my right, I heard someone shout, "Medic!" A corpsman ran right past me in that direction. For some reason, I followed him. I guessed that this was the story that old Jake was telling. The corpsman ran right through the trees, and I was right on his heels. He came up on two young privates dragging an officer away from the fighting. I recognized them as Jake and Jim, and Jim must have been the young man to his right. Jake stopped when they saw the corpsman and laid the officer gently on the ground. He and Jim stood watch over both. No words were exchanged. None were needed. They had seen their commander wounded and were trying to save his life. They left the corpsman to his work when they realized their commander was safe in good hands. They were tired, hurt, and bleeding a little themselves, but they headed back to the line. They ran low and fast looking for the other wounded. A Kong soldier hiding in a tree jumped as Jake and Jim were taking another wounded soldier away from the line. His bayonet sliced downward and caught Jake on his left shoulder. He screamed and dropped the wounded man. A shot rang out and Jim went down, but not before his sidearm appeared in his hand and returned fire. The Kong shoulder took the bullet in the foot. Jake pulled his K-bar and plunged it into the Kong's throat before he could even cry out. Jake checked on Jim and found a bullet hole in his flak jacket. Jim looked up at him. "Ow!" was all he said. "Ow? Ow? What the hell's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, it hurts, damn it," Jim responded. "Well, it should. If you can't shoot any better than that, it damn well better hurt." Jim laughed. "I was aiming for his head anyway. It's just a scratch. Felt it burn down my side and out the back. I'll be fine." The wounded soldier they had pulled from the front began to groan. "Back to work, old hoss," Jake said. "Yep," answered Jim. And that they did. If one tripped and fell, the other would pick him up and push him on. I watched all this like I was in a dream. And maybe I was, but I was amazed by what I saw as these two brave lads pulled at least another 20 wounded soldiers to safety, and all of that under heavy fire. My eyes began to mist over as the mist of battle started to fade. Slowly, the diner began to reform around me. I sat stunned by what I had just experienced. We spent a little time in an army hospital and then rotated back home a little while later. Jim married his high school sweetheart and took a job down the hill at down at the mill in Groves Point. Moved there and raised a mighty nice family. Now he's gone. Jake finished up. I looked closely at old Jake, and he seemed totally oblivious to what had just occurred. He was standing to pay his bill, and I hurried over to thank him. He just chuckled and said, "Some of us old guys, all we have is our stories, but thank you just the same." He patted me on the back and turned and walked out. It was only then that I looked at my watch again. Damn, it was almost 11:30. I quickly paid my bill and rushed back to my office in time. Several years later, I had the opportunity to head back down Route 24, and decided to breakfast again at that little diner beside the road. Of course, I was hoping to see old Jake again and experience another of his stories. I got there a little before 8 and sat waiting for him to appear. Bonnie and Ray were still there and greeted me. Then Bonnie took my order. I think I recognized a few of the other customers from before, but by 9, though, there was no sign of Jake. I broached the subject with Bonnie. Oh, I'm sorry, hun. Old Jake passed away last summer. Things ain't been the same here around here since. Yeah, Ray spoke up and said, kinda quiet around here nowadays. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I actually meant it. I don't get out this way very often and was hoping to hear another of his stories. You and everyone else around here, mister, Ray added. So what brings you back out this way, sugar? Bonnie asked. Well, my job. Old Jake kind of reminded me of the man that got me this job. He was actually a street vendor in New Orleans, I began. My car had broken down and I was on foot. I took a taxi down to Royal Street and walked over to Bourbon. That's where I met Jean St. Pierre. He had ageless eyes and a timeless face. I saw him staring at me from the corner where he had parked his margarita stand, so I walked over and with a smile on his face, he said to me, let's take a trip. We'll step beyond this realm and into the world of the story. And then he began to tell me the most wonderful story. And about then, a strange mist began to fill the diner and fog the front windows. A dry wind began blowing, ruffling the napkins in their holders.
Wow, great interpretation. So,
Thank you.
watchers, what do you think? Is such a thing possible? Could someone tell a story so intense and so magical and so mystical that it would take you to another world? All right, the tale is told. Thank you, Lewis, again for such a dramatic and wonderful retelling of the story. We'll see you next time on Night Treks.